The global financial architecture experienced enormous cracks in its infrastructure with the financial crisis of the late 2000s. Initiated by the subprime mortgage crisis, the global financial crisis reintroduced the world to an era of bank failures, a credit crunch, private defaults, and massive layoffs. In this era of globalization, where economies are interreliant, the crisis affected almost every part of the world. However, in the midst of this turbulence, one sector of finance fared relatively well: Islamic finance. As a result, gaining traction and focus along the way, offering itself as an emerging and alternative system to conventional finance. Despite the development of Islamic finance, there remain some hurdles to its growth. These very obstacles and barriers were scrutinized by the Trust and Islamic Capital event, the first international and interdisciplinary conference of its kind.
The significance and the objective of holding this event is to consider trust between communities, Muslims and non-Muslims, through Islamic business and Islamic finance context. We noticed that businesses can make a huge difference in the dialogue between communities. And Islamic finance is a major service and product that Islam can offer to Muslims and non-Muslims as ethical financial product.
The world today operates, for the most part, in a post-colonial context. Critics of conventional finance argue that there is a danger of Western businesses capitalizing on the ever-increasing nature of globalization by disseminating Western business models far and wide, especially in non-Western regions.
I think there have been dangers in the past with Western thinking, Western business approaches, Western almost ideologies that we know how we can do it better. That's changing. It's changing very rapidly. You're seeing more and more South-South cooperation, as it's called in the development world.
Islamic finance can be seen as a response to particular facets of contemporary neoliberal global finance. It answers it in particular ways. It has a slightly different scale of values too.
Recent times have seen a growth of the Islamic finance sector. Expanding products and services have proliferated within Muslim-majority countries, and Islamic finance has expanded further afield to other parts of the world.
I think Islamic finance has seen a recent efflorescence because a lot more Muslim communities are aware that they can actually go to Islamic finance. And I think there are communities in countries where, sort of non-Islamic people imagine and think and are right to believe this, that Islamic finance is a way that they can actually get a kind of financial package they can trust. And partly this is a result of people's failure in trust in regular banking institutions. I think Islamic finance offers them a chance for a different kind of banking experience.
So I think really because the Muslim communities across the globe have to some extent also been on the receiving end of some of the results of neoliberalism in terms of wars of just in recent years, I think the appetite for a different community-oriented type of financial system really has grown for that reason. And I think it's also likely to appeal also to other people who just really are rather concerned about the lack of ethics within neoliberal capitalism.
The world's Muslim population is expected to increase by approximately 35% in the next 20 years, rising from 1.6 billion to 2.2 billion by 2030. With this growth comes an increased need for more products and services that fall in line with Islamic values, including financial products. Although it is still modest in size relative to conventional finance, Islamic finance is rapidly becoming more visible and is now a consideration for many countries worldwide. In 2014, the UK government issued the first sovereign sukuk and expressed aspirations to be the Western hub of Islamic finance.
Well, Islamic finance offer a more responsible Islamic finance services, responsible and ethical in so many ways. It achieves the values that many of the investors and consumers looking for in financial product.
Sri Lanka is an interesting case, and partly the Sri Lankan government was very interested in getting involved with Islamic finance because it allowed the central bank a larger pool of loans that they could possibly access as a national entity. So many people who think of Islamic finance think of individual consumers and banks. And it's also important to extend and expand the notion of Islamic finance to think about country-to-country or peer-to-peer national level borrowing or national level, let's say, equity arrangements, rather than obviously borrowing with interest, which doesn't quite fit a conventional Islamic model.
As this sector grows, it continues to gain attention from the wider financial arena. However, is Islamic finance being seen as just another emerging prospect to exploit, or has the whole sector been initiated by the Muslim community itself for its own religious beliefs?
I think it's a combination of the two. I think that in Muslim-majority countries, what I think of as genuine Islamic accounting coming from the bottom up has already had a big impact. What I'm more suspicious about is conventional Western banks who see Islamic finance as just another market that they can engage in, where they don't really want to take the Islamic principles seriously.
This is why it's very important to present it to Muslims and non-Muslims and promote it widely, because it offers solution for a problem we have today, and it became very obvious since the financial crisis in 2008.
I think it's important to think about Islamic finance and Islamic products in a sort of global context, really, and to understand that the distinctive things that the global Ummah, if you like, is demanding now cannot always be provided using the traditional models. And Islamic finance really steps in, I think, to fill the breach where those models maybe are at odds with Muslim values in some way, or maybe have a detrimental effect on Muslim societies.
Amongst Muslim-majority countries, Malaysia leads the way with the most established Islamic economy. But how has this country achieved this?
In my opinion, this is made possible with the strong support from the governments. And at the same time, we have got the right talents. We have all the institutions that is important to build up the talents. For example, we have INSIAF, the Islamic University, as well as Kuala Lumpur house the authority in terms of regulating the Islamic financial services, which is IFSB, Islamic Financial Services Board. And I think this altogether make it possible to Malaysia leading the way in terms of establishing Islamic economy.
The financial crisis highlighted diffuse irregularities and problems within the financial sector. 2 recessions and a series of bank scandals resulted in the colossal demise of global public trust in financial institutions. This opened an opportunity for alternative financial systems to emerge and make a stance, including Islamic finance. However, the focus on trust remains intact and a concern.
All those questions which apply to individuals also apply to groups and nations, and also business products too. How are Islamic products, for example, marketed? How are they certified as halal, within the Muslim world itself? Who then buys them? And do they invest their trust in particular producers of those things? All those questions of trust really are kind of central to the whole dynamic of business and modern life in general.
Using marketing relationship approach, where you build a trust relationship with the clients, with customers, and with the financial sector in general, because the financial sector is regulated by the conventional banking sector.
Compliance and standardization within Islamic finance often come under scrutiny. Sharia boards are made up of Islamic scholars versed in the Quran and Islamic jurisprudence. However, there is currently no common framework, so there can be as many religious interpretations as there are scholars. This continues to beleaguer the industry.
I think there's a problem that Islamic scholars do have different views of particular products. Some scholars believe certain products are acceptable that other scholars find difficult, and it does raise problems because certain financial products will be allowable, say in Malaysia, but not acceptable in the Gulf. And I think it also provides possibilities for banks to exploit this because they know the sorts of opinions that different scholars are likely to come up with, and so if they have a marginal product, they might go to a particular scholar who they believe will give a favourable judgment rather than go to a scholar who perhaps takes a harder line.
Recent years have seen a push to develop Islamic financial services, resulting in a rise in the industry. However, with cultural and linguistic diversity among multi-regional Muslim communities, and with the apparent differences between conventional and Islamic finance, is there potential for cross-cultural collaboration and entrepreneurship?
I think there are a variety of ways in which we can do it. We need to understand each other's culture. The more we can understand each other's culture from a social point of view, from an economic point of view, and especially from a business point of view, it makes it easier to link, to trade, and to find opportunities to work together.
While Sharia does not address finance in its modern meaning, it does incorporate principles that govern and regulate finance and economics according to Islam. With all aspects governed by religion, how does Islamic finance fit into the modern world in which we live, where the wider financial sector is ruled by adherence to local laws and regulations of a particular country and not through any belief system? How can it be ensured that cultural aspects do not get confused or merged with religiosity when implementing Sharia-compliant financial products and services?
Religiosity do play an important role because, especially in retail banking sector, because the consumers, the cultural values and the values ingrained in them drive what they are deciding or what they do. So this is also applicable in deciding whether or not to take Islamic financial services or in particular Islamic banking services.
Now, the question of sort of a general notion of what Islam means gets very complicated when you move it into particular cultural contexts. And in many instances, I think people prefer to think of a general notion of Islam versus the sort of different cultural differences through which Muslim communities actually live religious lives. I actually think it's important to bring the two together. So rather than dropping the cultural and moving towards some generic notion of religion, I think it's very important to attend to the particularities of Muslim communities.
Since the credit crunch, consumers are increasingly wary of what organisations do with their money, bringing ethical issues to the forefront. With Islamic finance aligning itself with being more ethical and transparent than the mainstream, is it as principled as it suggests?
Islamic finance certainly has the potential, I think, to be more ethical, to perhaps consider the effects of some of its activities, rather than a kind of rampant neoliberalism that you've seen in the last few years. One of the reasons for that, I think, is because it does grow out of a particular community with a particular scale of values who would not necessarily be comfortable at all with some of the byproducts, if you like, of global capitalism in terms of inequality, in terms of certain types of rapacious capitalist activities in different parts of the world.
In an environment offering the availability of a variety of financial models, competition is strong and customer expectations are high for quality products and services. Coupled with an ever-changing world that is seeing a technological revolution, can Islamic finance maintain the momentum needed to keep pace with conventional finance?
I think Islamic finance can keep up given the ways in which economic conditions are changing, because there are a million products on the market, because consumers are aware of lots of technological options, by combining technology with hands-on personal service. The work I do shows me that business models work best when there's an incredible amount of personal face-to-face interaction built into the model.
The Muslim communities of the world, while sharing the same faith, do differ culturally. Although not globally established, is it a realistic proposition for Islamic finance to integrate into conventional finance? What is the crossover potential?
I think it's possible, and it does it two ways. And one of them is regular banks who offer Islamic products and Islamic banks who offer non-Islamic products to non-Islamic communities. So it's possible to do a hybrid.
Within any business sector, branding is vitally important in this day and age in advancing a product or a service. With increased growth beyond Muslim-majority countries, does Islamic finance now have reputation enough to adopt a way to promote itself like conventional finance to further its progress? Is Islamic finance brand-worthy?
Well, Sharia finance is brand-worthy, yes, and it is a brand in itself. Islamic finance became a brand, and how we manage it is very important. How Islamic finance services and banks develop this is extremely important. And this is why in branding and marketing, we need to collaborate with those bankers and financial service institutions to make sure that it is appealing in the right way, that it is understood and the knowledge widen about it.
I think the question of the acceptability of the Islamic label within Islamic finance is a very thorny topic. Some of the things that have happened in recent years have given it a bad name. So I think there is a need to explain really that Islamic finance is not some alien secret wedge into Western society, but it's actually about reorienting financial practices, business models, if you like, to a more ethical bent. And I think if that's explained without scare stories, without stereotypes, without prejudice, then more people would certainly see the value in that beyond the Muslim community.
With Islamic finance continuing to proliferate, numerous key players within the wider sector now offer some form of Islamic financial product or service. How do experts perceive its further evolution?
We need to promote cross-cultural entrepreneurship in as many ways as we can. And I think the opportunities are greater than they ever have been.
It's a great future because it's needed in the industry, and there isn't good practice of marketing in Islamic finance services yet as much as there should be.
The projection that can be made about the future of Islamic finance is, I think, very positive.
Some of the economists think that Islamic financial service is actually a good alternative to the conventional financial services.
I think Islamic finance has a very long and healthy life to live.
Slowly but surely, Islamic finance is making its mark on the world global financial stage. And as this sector continues to grow, issues around trust are continually being scrutinized and addressed.